Today we're going to talk about finding the intercepts of a function in various representations, which is learning target 2. We've talked about finding the slope, which is how a function changes. Now we're going to find the intercepts. Now, the intercepts are the places where the graph crosses each axis, the x-axis and the y-axis. The x-intercept happens where the graph crosses the x-axis, and the y-intercept happens where the graph crosses the y-axis. Now, if you think about the x-intercept happens when it crosses the x-axis. So that's at points like this. Any point on this x-axis. If we start thinking about points on the x-axis, let's just kind of draw a graph up here in the corner. Okay. This point right here is -4, 0. This point right here, 2, 0. That's a 2. This point right here, 5, 0. Any point on the x-axis, -4, 0, 2, 0, 5, 0. All those points on the x-axis have a 0 for the y value. So the x-intercept happens whenever y is 0. Now the y-intercept happens whenever x is 0. Because if you think about ordered pairs that happen on the y-axis, like this one right here, let's say, that would be 0, 2. Or 0, -3. Or 0, -5. All those points on right along that y-axis there, we have 0, 2, 0, -3, 0, -5. They all happen when x is 0. So the x-intercepts happen whenever the y-coordinate is 0. And the y-intercepts happen whenever the x-coordinate is 0, because you don't move left or right at all. You just stay right on the axis. Now, we're going to use this knowledge right here whenever we think about intercepts. That each intercept happens whenever the other variable is 0. Looking at a graph, it's pretty easy to spot the intercepts. Remember, this is the y-axis and this is the x-axis. So the x-intercept happens right here at 1, 2, 3, that's a 4 right there. Okay, so that's at the point 4, 0. That's when the graph crosses the x-axis, so that's the x-intercept. The y-intercept is at the point 0, 3. So we're just looking for the places on the graph when the coordinates, the ordered pairs, when the graph crosses the axis. And the x-intercept is always going to have a y value for a 0 for the y value, and the y-intercept will always have a 0 for the x value, because that's what happens at each axis. Now the x-intercept here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 4, 0 right there. And then the y value here, oh, it's the same as the last one. Look at that. 0, 3. Okay. The x-intercept here is right out there at 4, 0 again. And then the y-intercept is down here at -3. And here the x-intercept is right there at 1. And the y-intercept is down here at 0, -2. So notice again that for all of my x-intercepts, the 0 is in the y spot. And for all of my y-intercepts, the 0 is in the x spot. Because any coordinate on the x-axis is going to, you don't go up or down at all, so y is 0. Any coordinate on the y-axis, you don't go left or right at all, so it's at the x. The 0 is in the x spot. Now we're going to use that information to do these. So if we look at this table right here, If we want to find the x-intercept, we're just going to find the spot when y is 0. So that would be right here. This is a spot that would fall on the x-axis because it's a spot that has a 0 for the y-coordinate. So that is going to be our x-intercept. And the y-intercept happens when x is 0. So it's going to be right there. Right here, the x-intercept happens when y is 0. So that would be here when y or f of x is 0. And the y-intercept happens when x is 0. So that's right there. For this one, the x-intercept happens when y is 0, so that's here. And the y-intercept happens when x is 0, which is not on our table, so we're going to have to follow it back. So let's look at the pattern. It seems to be going up by 4 each time, so to follow it back until x is 0, we have to go back 2. So 1, that would go from 8 to 4, that goes back 4, back 4, back 4, back 4, back 4. So just continuing the pattern of the table, that would be the y-intercept. So we've talked about how to find the intercepts for graphs and on tables. Let's talk about equations. So let's say we have the equation right there. Okay? To find the, remember, so in order to find the intercepts on equations, you have to remember that each intercept happens when the other value is 0, just like we talked about up here. The x-intercept happens when y is 0, and the y-intercept happens when x is 0. So looking down here, I'm going to divide this into 2 columns. If we want to find the x-intercept, we put 0 in for y. 0 in for y. Or f of x, because it's the same thing. So to find the x-intercept, I put 0 in here. Then I just solve it. I'm essentially finding x when f of x equals 0. So I put 0 in right there. Then I just solve to figure out what x is. Minus 10 minus 10. So I get negative 10 equals 5x. Divide by 5. So x is negative 2. Which means, oops, sorry, that when y is 0, the x value is negative 2, so that's my intercept. For the y-intercept, I put 0 in for x. So now I have f of x equals 5, well, times 0 plus 10, and then that would be a 0, because that's what I'm plugging in for x. So I really have f of 0 equals 5 times 0 plus 10. I'm putting 0 in for x. So f of 0 equals 5 times 0 is just 0 plus 10. Which means that when I put 0 in for x, the y value is 10. So that's my y-intercept. We are not going to do point-slope form because that's really tricky, and you might as well just change it into slope-intercept form. There's no sense trying to do it when it's in point-slope form. And we'll talk about how to do that later. In standard form, let's look at this equation right here. I'm going to make 2 columns because I have 2 intercepts I have to find. The x-intercept and the y-intercept. And remember that for the x-intercept, I put 0 in for y, and for the y-intercept, I put 0 in for x. So I'm just going to do both of those things. And to find each intercept, remember I'm going to put 0 in for the opposite letter. So to find the x-intercept, I'm going to put 0 in for y. So it's going to look like this. 3 times 0 equals 12. Now, 3 times 0 is just 0, so that kind of goes away, and I really just have 4x equals 12. So if I divide both sides by 4, x equals 3. So when I put 0 in for y, x equals 3. That's the x-intercept. For the y-intercept, I put 0 in for x. So I have 4 times 0 plus 3y equals 12. 4 times 0 is just 0, so that goes away. So I have a positive 3y equals 12. I know it's positive because that's a plus right there. So if I divide both sides by 3, y equals 4. Which means when I put 0 in for x, y was 4. So the key thing about the intercepts is just to remember that each intercept happens when the opposite letter is 0. And if you can remember that, you can find the intercepts to any function.